Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon to the Whaling Museum. My name's Jacob Horton. I'm the Public Programs Coordinator here at the NHA. It's always a pleasure to see so many faces here at the Food for Thought lecture series. We'd like to thank our supporters. The MS Worthington Foundation helps support Food for Thought in both the spring and the fall. And as always, our audiovisual support is provided by Novation Media. I'd like to ask you all to please silence your cell phones for the duration of this presentation. Remind you that restrooms are right around the corner that way, should you need them. We want to make another note about another public program that we have, an ongoing series that is generously supported by the Community Foundation. It's a series that we call our Nantucket series. We invite members of the community to come in and celebrate their cultures of origin here at the Whaling Museum. We've done this with the Bulgarian community and the Nepalese community already. And the next will be with the Salvadorian community here on Nantucket. It'll be November 1st. That's a Sunday from 4 to 6. So we'd love to see you all here on that date. Tell your friends. It's going to be fun. It's going to be music and entertainment. We're going to get to know some of the community members, food, and it's free. So come on down for that and bring friends, and we'll have a great time. So getting today's presentation, Dr. Peter Morrison. Peter Morrison earned his doctorate at Brown University. He was the founding director of RAND's Population Research Center, and he's spoken on the topic of demographics, public policy, business, to government officials, business leaders, international and domestic students, and to interested parties here on Nantucket. He currently serves as co-president of the Nantucket Civil League, a director of the Nantucket Shellfish Association, and he sits on the town's Visitor Services Advisory Committee. In his presentation this afternoon, Dr. Morrison will be utilizing excerpts that I produced as part of my internship as an oral history intern here, so I'm particularly excited about that, to see them put to good use. And Dr. Morrison really, he's an influential leader and thinker, and we're thrilled to welcome him here to the Whaling Museum this afternoon. So please, round of applause for Mr. Morrison. Dr. Morrison.
Thank you, Jacob, and welcome everyone. It's a great turnout today. I'd like to add my voice to the commercial here for our Nantucket. I've been to the first two events, and they are not to miss. They're absolutely fantastic if you want to get a feel for our immigrant communities and also a taste of the cuisine. It's a wonderful way to spend an evening. I feel lucky to have picked immigration as my topic way back last spring when I said I was sort of feeling ready to give another talk at Food for Thought. Before it became such a topic of contention, and I was thinking that I might just be smart enough to maybe run for office this year. But if I did, I'd have to follow the path of a predecessor, a man who went to his doctor and he said, I want to run for president of the United States. But he explained that his fellow party members objected. They said, you know, the problem is that you're too smart. So the doctor said, well, what's your IQ? And he said, it's 130. The doctor thought for a moment. And he said, well, the only viable procedure would be to remove exactly 1/3 of your brain tissue. Is that really where you want to go? And the man said, yes, I want to do that. So the doctor showed him the laser device that he had. He explained how it would zap exactly 1/3 of his brain tissue, and he connected the laser to a monitor screen so he could track the patient's declining IQ. The doctor threw the switch, the numbers ticked off, 129, 128, 127, and the phone rang. And when the doctor hung up 2 minutes later, he panicked. He glanced at the screen. The numbers were ticking off 33, 32, 31. He threw the switch just as the laser was about to wipe out the last 1/3 of the man's brain. God, what have I done? He looked at him. Speak to me. Say something. The patient looked at him with one of those completely vacant stares. I, Mike Huckabee, announce my candidacy for President of the United States. Now, my topic today is immigration on Nantucket, and I want to underscore what you should know, as opposed to what you may be hearing coming out of the mouths of politicians these days. Each of us is a Nantucketer, either through the lottery of birth or by choice. That's a distinction that has particular relevance for Nantucket. As we all know, thousands of seasonal residents, temporary workers come and go each year, and I liken that to an annual conveyor belt of people, a conveyor belt that brings a select few who eventually choose Nantucket as their home. Let me have a show of hands. How many of you were born in Nantucket? Raise your hands. I see 2 people. Now, those of you who were carried here on the conveyor belt, formed an attachment, and eventually settled here, raise your hands. Remarkable. I knew that you would be in the majority, but I didn't realize by how much. So you, who just raised your hands, are the focus of my presentation today. The Nantucketers who've settled here by choice, specifically those of us drawn from around the world who have remade us as a community. Nantucket has all the hallmarks of an immigrant entry port. Once an immigrant entry port is established, immigrant communities become the conspicuous destinations for more immigrants from the same origins, from Ireland and more recently from Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Asia. Nantucket, though, is unlike other immigrant entry ports. This community is remarkable for how it has welcomed aspiring newcomers, people from around the world, people seeking a future beyond their place of birth. As an immigrant entry port, Nantucket has attracted distinctive types of individuals, and those individuals, those of you who raised your hands, have lent a distinctive demographic complexion to our community. Today I'm going to focus on how immigrants and their descendants have integrated into American society and here on Nantucket, and what this means for our own posture going forward. I'll review some facts about immigration, both national and local, and thanks to a wonderful project that NHA has sponsored on oral histories that Jacob mentioned, we'll hear the voices of Nantucket newcomers who've sought a future here as they recount their own aspirations and experiences. And we'll take a brief tour of national immigration policy and its present failures. Lastly, I'm going to offer my own observations on what we've done and what we should do. Tracking demographic change is probably the slowest of the performing arts. It's like watching grass grow from year to year. I'm going to begin with some key definitions and facts about immigration. First, by the people of Nantucket, I mean those of us who designate Nantucket as our usual place of residence. We who call Nantucket home. Officially, we numbered 10,172 people on the last decennial census in 2010. The Census Bureau estimates that we now number 10,856. That's the latest official estimate, and it's a number that our town clerk will adamantly dispute as too low. In contrast to the people of Nantucket, the people on Nantucket are we who call Nantucket home, plus the many sojourners who come and go seasonally, joining us year after year in many cases. They include foreign-born seasonal workers, second homeowners, multi-generation extended families, and there are even a few nationally renowned white-collar criminals among us. Many people choose this place deliberately, and every year some small fraction of them topple off that seasonal conveyor belt. By choice, they attach themselves to this community. One could say that this place chose the people who came off the conveyor belt. That distinction between many people who've chosen a place and a place that only chose a certain few of them reveals something very profound about who we are and how immigration shapes our future. Let's listen to Vasilenko Kristova recount this experience.
Vasilenka Kristova and her husband came to the United States in 2004, brought here by their son Chris. In this excerpt, she discusses the excitement of that new opportunity.
I was born in Bulgaria in a little, very industrial town called Demographer town. Yeah, it's not easy to grow up under communist regime. Absolutely not. We didn't allow to learn and speak English, for example. American and England was enemies for us. My son, his name is Chris. He was born in Bulgaria. He was graduated in high school with French language. And English was like second language there. And after that, my husband said, you have to do your duty in the military, and after that you will be free to go everywhere. It was after Berlin walls fell down. So, and he came here. He was actually first Bulgarian guy here on Nantucket. He worked for Bartlett's Farm with international program like they have now. Oh yeah, immediately when he came here, he called us by phone and he said, I'm on a small island called Nantucket. So we never heard about that, of course, but we immediately go to a huge atlas and we immediately found where Nantucket is. So it was very exciting for us. He can work to many places, but he was here, which is amazing. He discovered Nantucket for many Bulgarians, for all Bulgarians here. He was the young man who discovered Nantucket. Everybody knows that America is dream.
Circular migration is a universal form of human mobility. In North America, we have thousands of Mexican seasonal workers who follow the harvest from California's Central Valley to the orchards of Yakima Valley in the state of Washington. Nantucket's seasonal workers have well-defined circular migration pathways. Invariably, those beaten paths trace back to some pioneer migrant, a self-selected person who gambled on the prospect of a better life here. In doing so, that decision gave rise eventually to what we call a transnational community, a community of Irish, Jamaicans, Bulgarians, and Nepalese, all Nantucketers.
Greg Partita arrived on Nantucket in 1996, and Jesus, his brother, a few years later. Here, Greg and Jesus discuss hope and sacrifice for their family on Nantucket.
I came with a friend in '96, started working for a landscaper, Ken Powell. Worked for him for about 3 years. And then the following year, I brought my dad, 2 brothers, and a cousin. The idea was to save up some money, buy a house back home. Back then, back home was the state of Washington, in a town called Toppenish. But we all thought that we were just going to come for a couple of years, like everybody else is. We ended up staying here. Back on those days, we wouldn't see any Hispanic faces here, because we were so used to Hispanic faces. We're like, where are they? We would see somebody, we would get so happy and hug them and everything, even though we didn't know them. Anywhere else that we've lived, even in Mexico, even in the state of Washington we used to live, there was a lot of crime. I see the difference of life that we have here that we didn't back home.
Everybody knows everybody. There's a few times where we've needed the community, and they've always, for any problem, everybody knows who we are. So it's kind of a sense of union. Nothing happens without anybody else finding out, and they help each other. Nantucket is amazingly close as a community. I could say that because of our line of work, I think all of us here are affected by Lyme's disease. But I think that's kind of one of those things that you give something up in order for your family, your kids to have a place to live in, education, and food, you know.
We haven't worked Sundays in a while because of family. No matter how much money you make in life, it's not worth it if it's going to take the little bit of time that you could spend with them. But we come here, all we want to do is have a better life for our kids. And I think everybody wants that.
One can trace most of Nantucket's immigrant communities to one or a few pioneer migrants like Mr. Partita. To me, they stand out as self-selected strivers from around the world, people whose initial gamble paved the way for others, and in doing so, gradually infused Nantucket's population with additional self-selected individuals who sought a permanent life on Nantucket. It's as though a kind of prism separates those few from the many who come and go seasonally. And I believe that passing through that demographic prism is more human ambition than anyone can measure. We are, of course, a nation of immigrants, and Nantucket is a community populated, built, and transformed by successive waves of migration from around the world. And I'd like to briefly highlight that national experience for you. This chart traces the size of the foreign-born population from 1850 on the left to the present. Since 1924, which is about in the middle of the chart, U.S. immigration policy was based on a formula that made it relatively easy for Northern Europeans to immigrate. But the formula set very strict limits for everyone else. In 1965, that's about 2/3 of the way across on the right, where you start to see the numbers going up very sharply. In 1965, President Johnson signed a new Immigration and Nationality Act, which opened the nation to immigrants from parts of the world that had been excluded by the old national origin system. What ensued was arguably the most significant period of immigration in our history, which is displayed on the right, where you see that steep rise in the numbers that go up to about 40 million immigrants. There are nearly 59 million people who have come to the United States since 1965. It was not an unrestrained migration, because the Act did create preferences for those with technical training or those who had family members in the United States. But it was vastly more open than before. And so what we have today are 41 million immigrants in the U.S. who represent 13% of our population, and their U.S.-born children, which are the second generation, representing another 37 million people, or about 12% of the population. When you put the two generations together today, these first and second generation immigrants account for 1 of every 4 of us nationwide. Now, among those 13% who are the first generation immigrants are 1 of every 4 American Nobel Prize winners, about 1 of every 4 MacArthur Genius awardees, Among those 13% of first-generation immigrants are disproportionate numbers of inventors who hold patents. And among those 13% are one of every four of the founders of fast-growing American companies. Included here are names like Google co-founder Sergey Brin, who emigrated from the Soviet Union with his parents at age 6. As Ted Wimmer noted in the New York Times, the 1965 Immigration Act shows that our willingness to lower barriers made this a better country. And let's acknowledge that American cuisine has become incomparably more interesting as it's grown more diverse. We all know that here on Nantucket.
Moved to Nantucket in 2000. He and his wife Bo own Siam To Go restaurant. Here he discusses working hard for his family.
When I was a kid, I lived with a lot of people because my parents had to work a lot, so we never been like a family, really family. We always separate. I grew up in Yanawa. It's a part of the Bangkok until I was 17 years old and I came here. So I don't know how the teenage life is. Because when I came here, I had to go to school and then work. I worked since I came here. With my father, his older brother, he came like with a student visa. He works a lot, worked hard, and then he applied for the green card. He was like we call it a Robin Hood. The first one is already here and then apply for everybody. So basically, in my family, everybody got green card. Siam To Go basically is a family business. My wife, Bo, she found out that there's a space available at the ice rink. And she planning for me to work there just to do a snack bar, basically a sandwich, selling candy. That's what her plan. But at that time, her uncle come up, why don't we do Thai food? It's something that we try to make it close to Thai. If you want to compare our food to Thailand, you couldn't do that because from Thailand it's much better. This here, that's what we can do, make it the best as we can. My daughter's middle name is Boya, so I call her Boya. She's 23 months old. I think it's changed a lot when you have kids. And worry, how's she gonna be? Is she gonna be okay? Hopefully, everything should be all right. People know each other on this island. If you really live here for 10 years, maybe you never talk to them, but they recognize your face. So hopefully, if they see my daughter did something wrong, hopefully they come to me and say, hey, you know what? Like we will try to watch out for each other. I think for this island it's like that.
How many of you have patronized Siam To Go? Raise your hand. Wow. So you recognize the face. Interesting story. I want to turn now to our immigration system nationally, and the simple one-line description is immigration policy is broken. Economic migrants face huge barriers. Firms seeking skilled foreign workers find it costly, time-consuming, often impossible, thanks to cumbersome rules and a rigid cap on visas. We experience that here on Nantucket every summer. We award PhDs to foreign-born students. Next, we prevent them from pursuing scientific careers in the U.S. by denying them work visas for many years. Young entrepreneurs are incentivized to take their big ideas elsewhere. Police in Arizona constantly check the papers of anyone who looks vaguely Mexican. California offers them driver's licenses. And then there are the unintended consequences. As one example of an unintended consequence, I want to just walk you through the findings of a friend of mine who's an eminent Princeton researcher who has studied the circular migration of Mexican workers back and forth across the Mexican-American border. He characterized border enforcement as a policy response to a moral panic about the perceived threat of Latino immigration to the United States. Does that sound a familiar bell to you these days? Have you heard that in the news lately? He identified a self-perpetuating cycle of rising enforcement and increased apprehensions as militarizing the Mexican-American border increased. He has demonstrated, and in fact he's even quantified, how rising enforcement, not surprisingly, has affected the behavior of unauthorized migrants. What happened is that it has impeded the male breadwinners' seasonal return migration to Mexico. Once you come to the United States and there is high level of border enforcement, you don't go back at the end of the season. You say, if I go back, I'll never be able to get back in. Border enforcement also has redirected migrant flows to elsewhere along the Arizona border and then onward toward new destinations throughout the U.S. So what we can say about the policy of increased border enforcement is simply that it backfired. It cut off a long-standing tradition of migratory circulation, and what it created in its place was a large-scale settlement of undocumented migrants who otherwise would have continued moving back and forth across the border. In short, the policy transformed undocumented Mexican migration from a circular flow of male workers going back and forth to just 3 states on the West Coast into an 11 million person population of settled families living in all 50 states. I'm going to show you the map of foreign-born Mexicans in 1980. You'll notice a few large bubbles, Southern California, scattered across Texas. 20 years later, here's where foreign-born Mexicans were in 2000. Many more bubbles, and I wish I could show you the map for 2015, but no one has put one together since 2000. So we're mired in a national debate, a debate that is riddled with misinformation and just plain crazy talk. Would any president engineer the mass expulsion of 11 million unauthorized immigrants? Do we deploy railroad cars, federal troops, police dogs? It's all, to me, a surreal collection of untrue assertions and bizarre proposals disconnected from reality. And it's doubtful that Congress can fix this mess anytime soon. So, can we distill any lessons from this national stage? One lesson is that you'd better ground any immigration policy in an understanding of the demographic processes operating. Specifically, immigrants' motivations and the resulting patterns of movement that result from those motives. Here's one lesson I take away, and it pertains to the present political debate. Who's the most dangerous person in the room? That person is the one who doesn't know what he doesn't know. Something to keep in mind when you cast your vote next year. Another lesson, I think, is that all immigration policy really is local, just as all politics is local for the same reason. It is local communities that make a nation of immigrants by offering local contexts of immigrant reception, contexts that affect how immigrants and their offspring are incorporated into neighborhoods, schools, local labor markets, and ultimately U.S. society. Federal programs can dispense temporary work visas, but they don't dispense compassion. Let's listen one last time to one of us, Jurga Danileta.
Jurga Danileta arrived in Nantucket in 2001. She now owns Sunshine Gardening, a landscaping company. Here she shares her first and second impressions of Nantucket.
I was born in Lithuania. The town where I was born was pretty small. It's somewhat similar to Nantucket, where people knew each other. When Soviet Union broke up, Dad bought collective farm. Mom also quit her teaching job and became farmers. A lot of my classmates and of course me, we were so excited to see the world, and for many it was more like opportunity to earn money, but for me it was more like my mom was always telling me, if you have any opportunity to travel, you have to travel. We found a job there in Nantucket at Tristram's Landing, but then Nantucket was like, oh my god, is this America? Dirt roads? They described so beautiful. We were like, what did they see beautiful here? It wasn't really what we expected. One of our girlfriends met someone from Rochester, New York, and she said, girls, this is so cool over here. After 3 weeks, I was like so missing Nantucket. So I called one of my girlfriends and I said, Tanya, we have to go to Nantucket. We were in the boat, a little slow ferry, and we saw Nantucket. Those white trims and beautiful sunny sky, and it was so beautiful. Like, it's amazing. The first impression when I came to Nantucket from Lithuania, I didn't really see any beauty here. But that second time was like something magnificent, and the feeling that you're coming back home.
So there you have it. We're a place where immigrants can become Americans. I'm grateful to the Nantucket Historical Association for offering all of us, not just here, but nationwide on YouTube, those invaluable oral histories for documenting immigrants' experiences here. This ongoing effort to chronicle that experience for posterity really deserves our support. We need to assemble more of these oral histories while they're fresh in people's minds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Morrison. Does anyone have questions before we let Dr. Morrison go? One moment. Could you please use the mic?
My name is Peggy Tramposh, and thank you for that wonderful talk. And for any of you here who would like to become more involved with our immigrant community, coincidentally, today at the library at 4:30, the Athenaeum sponsors a literacy program, and it's an introductory meeting for anyone who might be interested in becoming a literacy tutor. And it's the best, easiest volunteer job around. You don't have to have any experience being a tutor. You just have to like people and be willing to sit down and talk with someone for an hour a week. So I urge anyone who can come to join us today at 4:30 at the library. And if you can't come today, check them out on the Athenaeum's website and become involved in that way.
Thanks, Peggy. That is a great program. Coming over to you, sir.
Thanks, Peter. Peter, you said that the town clerk and the U.S. Census Department have a difference of opinion about what the true population is on Nantucket. Do you have a sense of what the true population is? I'm assuming that the difference between what the Census Bureau says and the town clerk says are undocumented people?
It depends on what time of the year you're referring to. The Census Bureau has a very specific definition. April 1st, Census Day, they say how many people, if you go knock on doors, how many people are you going to find? They actually did that, and they found 10,000 and change. If you look at the town clerk's data, which I have done, that form that she sends out at the end of the year, and it says how many dogs do you have, and also how many of you are there. that gives her a much more accurate reading on how many people are here at the time she sends the form out. They may be here for part of the year. They may not call Nantucket home, so it's a somewhat larger definition, but it is in fact a more relevant definition because it encompasses the people who are here using energy, generating trash, parking cars, etc. So if you go to the peak period of time, mid-August, you're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of upwards of as many as 60,000 bodies on island at any given time. That's based on the Worcester Polytech students' operationalization of a particular method whereby they can translate, just as our waste treatment plant translates trash into trash, they can translate trash into estimates of how many people must be generating it at any given time in August. So we know that we have wild swings in population. The problem is that the Census Bureau's definitions and the standard federal definitions that work for 99% of communities really are not as informative for us as we need them to be. So we don't have any way of telling how many people there are except what the town clerk has. I've actually worked with the town clerk and we challenged the Census Bureau's estimation procedure, and after about 6 months of bureaucratic fighting, they conceded that they thought there was 140 more people than they had estimated before. And I'm still trying to find out how that 140 has translated into the estimate that for every additional person that gets counted, all the programs at all levels of government generate about $1,000 more for the community. So there's somewhere out there's $130,000 more because I did that to the Census Bureau, but I don't know where the dollars are.
Like this. So over the past 20 years or so, my impression is that there have been these different influxes of other countries, like Irish people, people from Jamaica, Brazil, in different years, different phases. I don't know if you've done anything to kind of document the history of that, but I've always been curious what drives, one country, say Bulgaria, to discover Nantucket and not, Romania, which is right next door. Is it the laws that are different there, or just one pioneer discovers us, or economic circumstances, or?
There's an economic backdrop to it, but the fascinating thing about it is that it really is a matter largely of historical accident. You've heard several people say, I landed on Nantucket more or less by accident. It wasn't that I calculated the cost of living in Bulgaria and I looked at the United States and I said, well, there's hundreds of thousands of places I could settle. Maybe I should go to Nantucket, one of the most expensive places. What they did do is they heard that there were employment opportunities from somebody on this tiny island. And next year, there were people at their origin who heard about this and they said, well, my map of the United States is there's Nantucket and every place else. And the interesting thing is when you look at some of the other settlement patterns of immigrants nationwide, they typically have this channelized migratory look. That is to say, the people all end up going to just a few places. If you look at the Hmong refugee population, their worldview of the United States is there's Fresno, California, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and every place else. That's where it is. And you could say that in our communities here, I think the Nepalese population would say there's Nantucket, there's a couple other places in the United States, but Nantucket looms as large as Manhattan might loom for people in major metropolitan areas around the world. We're a big place on the map for certain groups just because of that accident of history.
Dimitri, did you have a comment?
Hi, my name is Tony Dumitru, and I happen to be from Romania. And just to answer your question, it is very simple. Bulgarians are renowned greengrocers. So if you want to have one of the best salads, you're going to Bulgaria. I can tell you this. So that explains the fact that they ended up coming to Bartlett's farm, as the lady mentioned, and then they started, the migration process, family after family. Well, Romania it's, I mean, we can talk a lot about this aspect, but basically it's based also upon the fact that Bulgaria has a closer connection to the United States through the American university they have in Sofia, whereas in Romania, the connection is not as close to the United States. And just one more comment, as an immigrant to this island, that should be in many places on Nantucket. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tony. Any other questions? Well,
Thanks, Jacob. And Peter, thank you very much. I'm Bill Tramposh, Executive Director of the NHA. Tony's case is a good one. You pointed out how difficult it is to get the visas and get the permits. We worked, as Tony knows, long and hard to keep him here as our collections manager. And I appreciate especially what you were saying about the system now needing repair. But the reason I wanted to stand up and thank you is because on behalf of the staff, we're very, very thankful for your good comments about the work we're doing in diversity. There's a lot that's been happening. There's much more that will be happening. You also complimented us on our oral histories, and I'm very, very pleased to say that Jacob, a Columbia University-trained oral historian, has been helping with our public programs this past year, but we've just found funding to keep him here for a whole other year to do many, many more oral histories, and I hope that oral history is just a cornerstone of the work we do at the NHA, and it means a lot for us to have you say that yourself, Peter, because you yourself are a real island treasure. Thanks.
Thank you.
thanks, Bill. Was there one more?
Thank you. Peter, do you have any answers to the immigration question?
Which question are you referring to? The immigration policy question? I think my tentative answer is I'm not looking forward to any national immigration policy that is anything remotely coherent in the near future. I guess in putting this presentation together, have come to the conclusion that it is a local phenomenon, and whatever policy we end up with at the national level will be an accumulation of what local communities are doing around the nation, probably not very many of them, with a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding and terribly uninformative rhetoric politically. It's a very discouraging kind of situation to see. It's almost as bad as the IRS.
All right.
I don't know, except from what I've picked up from some of the groups that have met here, and also what I can glean from the census data, which, as it turns out, are rather thin now because the last data we have are from 2010. There's probably 8 or 10 groups that are numerous enough to say that we've got an immigrant community. There are also scattered, individuals, families, extended families, who are here from one or another place. And you can think of those as possibly the embryonic starting points of future communities. Every one of these communities, remember, started out with the pioneer migrant, and if we wound the movie backwards to 1960, 70, 80, 90, whatever, I'd probably be saying, well, it's mainly Irish immigration, and there happens to be a Bulgarian family, or there happens to be a Jamaican family. And what's happened is there are phases to this, and the phases evolve over time, and it's a fascinating kind of story to tell and to watch. And the data for Nantucket are really so thin that the only way to tell the story is to get the oral histories. That's why I'm so enthusiastic about this program, because it is truly not only a treasure for us, but it's a national treasure to document for one small community how this has happened. I mean, this is a major, major asset for anybody who wants to understand how immigration can work at the local level and what it is that has led to this kind of rare natural experiment where we have ended up with a community that I would characterize by and large as extraordinarily welcoming in contrast to many other larger cities, which are at best tentative in their welcome and also are characterized by residential segregation. You know, you don't live where they live.
Any further questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you. I wonder what your position is on the bill in front of the Massachusetts legislature to declare the Commonwealth a sanctuary state, whereby illegal aliens convicted of crimes and subject to federal deportation would be no longer turned over to the federal government, to ICE, and where illegal aliens who are now not entitled to many of our welfare benefits would automatically qualify.
The answer to your question is I'd be tentatively in favor of it. That's something that has happened in San Francisco. What it does is it strips away the really embarrassing underbrush of enforcement that contradicts the principles that we have in our nation about fairness. You can't have that kind of a semi-police state evolving in place of what should be a more effective, well-thought-out policy that does what our underlying democratic principles say should be done.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morrison, and thank you all for coming. And we hope to see you again, maybe on November 1st.